So, good morning. First year Bcom Computer Applications Semester 2. First year Bcom Computer Applications Semester 2. Programming in C and C++. Today we start with Unit 3. Unit 3 is functions. Unit 3 is functions, arrays and strings. So, there are three types of set of questions: functions, arrays and strings. So, all these three concepts comes under Unit 3. These three are generally three separate concepts, and we may discuss all these things. So, functions, definition and declaration of functions, function prototypes, return statement, types of functions, formatted and unformatted functions, built-in functions, mathematical functions, string functions, character functions, date functions. And a second type of functions is user defined functions. So, basically functions are two type, built-in functions and user defined functions. So, user defined functions, introduction, need for user defined functions, character functions, date functions, and introduction, need for user defined functions, and elements of functions and function calls, call by value and call by reference, recursive functions. So, all these are our syllabus for functions, topic syllabus on functions or topic functions. So, Unit 3 contains three parts. These three are three separate essay questions: functions, arrays and strings. So, today we start with Unit 3 with functions. The definition of a function and how to use functions, and so what is the definition of functions and how to use functions, what are the different parts or elements or parts or components of a function, and why we require functions, why we use functions, and how to pass values or parameters between functions, scope, role of a function, calling a function, how to call a function, and advantages, advanced features, and what are the features and applications of using functions. All these are we may discuss here. So, what is a function? So, what is the definition of a function? A function is a self-contained block of statements that perform a task of some kind. Every C program can be thought of as a collection of these functions. As we noted earlier, using a function is something like, so what is a function? What is the definition of a function? Function is nothing but a set of statements or a group of statements. A set of statements or a group of statements which are executed or which can be run repeatedly, which are executed or runs repeatedly for any number of times. Means, for example, if you want to print, or if you want to do some calculation, like if you want to do some square root of a function, so that is a simple function. So, we may simply call that function for any number of times in any number of programs and many times in a single program, like that. So, generally every function have a unique name to identify it, some parameters, and like that. Again, main is another function. As we know that every C program should have a main function. What is the main function? Main is the one and only compulsory functions. What is a main function? Main function is the one and only compulsory function in every C program, and every program should have a main function within it, and every program should starts with a main function. So, main function is the compulsory function. So, every C program have many functions in it, and each and every program contains many functions written in it. So C program, any C program contains many functions written in it. So main itself is a function, and it is the compulsory one and only function which is compulsory used in each and every using some user defined functions. So main, printf within quotes of message, Italy and Brazil and Argentina. So Italy, Brazil and Argentina are basically three user defined functions. Three functions used or written in a C program. So in this sample C program, so these are the basic functions, uses of how to use a function within a C programs. So here again, after main, after closing, this is the main program. After that, here we may write separate declaration. These are called basically in C language. There are three components of components are used for defining and declaring functions in C language. So first part is called as defining the first part. So there are basically three parts or components are used in functions in C language. The first part is called as defining a function, second part is called as declaring a function, and third part is called as function declaration. So function definition, function usage or function calling, and function declaration are three parts, three components generally used in functions generally used in any C language. So what are the three components? Basically three components or three parts are used while using functions in C language. The first part is called defining a function. Second part is called as a declaration of a function. Third part is called as a calling a function. So C language, it should be defined. It should be first defined. After that, the definition of a function. After that, the definition of a function is used. After that, the definition of a function is used. And in the third part, we declare a function. We have to declare that or elaborate the definition of a function. So again, functions are basically in C language. Again, C language, two types of functions are used. First one is user defined functions and system defined functions. So generally in C language, not only in C language, in any language, the functions are basically two types. First one is called as user defined functions and system defined or library functions. So basically functions are two types. First one is called as user defined functions. User defined functions are our own functions, our own written functions. So in this example, Italy, Brazil and Argentina are three user defined functions. Generally they are all the functions are program code or programs are generally written in within the main function. Main is another function, and it is a main function of a C program, and generally written in all the C programs or any C program must have a main in it. So after basically what are the different types of functions? Basically two types of functions are used. First one is called as a user defined function. Second type of functions are called as system defined functions. Second type of functions are called as system defined functions or own defined and designed functions. And the second one is called as system defined functions. System defined functions are library functions are used to generally they are readily available functions in any C language or any C compiler. For example, to find out the square root of a number, or to find out the sine of a number, cosine of a number, all these are system defined functions. All these are called as system defined functions, or system defined functions are built-in functions. So functions are basically two types. One is system defined functions or user library functions. Second one is called as user defined functions. So under system defined functions, we may use system defined functions we may use either ready-made functions. They are also called as ready-made functions, or they are also called as readily used functions. Readily used functions means generally they can be used without any we simply use them or we simply call them like that. So here are some points regarding using of some functions in C language. Any C program contains at least one function. So what the first rule is, any C program means all the C programs have at least have a one function that is called as main. If a program contains only one function, it must be main. So main is the only one and only one function. Main is the only one and only one function it contains, or that should be starts in a C program. If a C program contains more than one function, then one of these functions must be main, and there is no limit in the number of functions that might be present in a C language. So every C program may contains any number of functions. Every C program or any C program may contains any number of functions in it. So there is no limit on the number of functions that might be present in a C program. Each function is a program is called the sequence specified by the function calls in main. So next is why we require, what is the need of functions, why we require functions, or what is the need of functions. So what is the basically, first of all, what is the basic definition of a function? A function is nothing but a set of rules, a set of statements, or a set of code, or a set of statements which is executed any number of times. So why write separate functions at all? Why not squeeze so writing functions avoid rewriting the same code over and over. So first advantage or first feature of functions is so to avoid writing the same code again and again. So by using functions, any number of times or a fixed number of times without any limitations. Suppose you have a section of code in your program that calculates area of a triangle if larger. So that is the main advantage of a program. Using functions, it becomes easier to write programs. So another feature or another advantage of using functions in C language is to to divide the large program into a small pieces of program by using some functions. So another advantage is to break or to divide a large program or a large code into a small pieces and use these code in a separate write in a separate function and call them easily. So that is the main advantage. So what are the different parts or what are the different components of a function? So what are the different parts or what are the components, what are the components or parts of a function in C language? So every function in C language have some properties or some elements. They are called as elements of C language. So every function have a, first one is every function have a unique name. Every function have a unique function name, and every function returns, every function generally returns, it may returns or it may not be return some value to the main function, and every function may have or may not have some parameters or some arguments in it. And so these are the three important elements or parts of a so what are the different elements, or again we discuss about these things. So what are the different components, what are the different components or elements of functions in C language. So every function have a unique function name, every function have a unique name to identify it, and every function have a return may or may not, every function may or may not have some return values, means some values may return some value to the main function or main program, or some functions may not return any return values, and every function may or may not have some parameters or argument list. So means generally so every all functions or every functions may or may not have some parameters or arguments passed to it, and return statement is used. What is the return statement? Return statement generally a statement called return. Return statements are generally used to return some values or return any values to the main program or to the main program of a C language. So passing values between functions. So how to pass on or how to pass values between, they are called as parameters or arguments. Generally the values which are used to pass from a main program or from a function to main program is called with commas, separated with commas. They are called as argument values or parameter values. So generally we may pass some values or some values to a function as a parameter or an argument. So here is a simple example of using a small function. So here a main bracket open int a b c sum. Here a b c sum are three local variables. So as we know that variables are basically two types, local variables and global variables. Local variables and global variables. Local variables are accessed, or local variables are available within a function only. Local variables are generally available through available to the within a function or within a main program only, whereas global variables are accessible or global variables are available throughout the program. Means generally global variables are accessible by accessible from anywhere in a program, So here we may write some message to display some message, printf enter any three numbers. After that we may use some scanf function here. So scanf within course, as we know that printf and scanf are two basic standard input output functions. So after that we call a function. Here we may use some statement like sum is equals to cal sum brackets a comma b comma c semicolon. Here cal sum is a function, user defined function. Cal sum is a cal sum is the name of the function. So this is a user defined function, not a system defined or not a library function. So user defined functions are generally written by the users or programmers. Here a comma b comma c are written in the within the brackets only, and they are separated by some commas. So here a b c, what are a b c? A, B, C are called as some variables. A, B, C are called as some variables. They are also called as some parameters. They are also called as some parameters or argument values. They are also called as some parameters or argument values passed out to the function called Ca-Sem. Ca-Sem is a user defined function. So here we call them from the main program. Ca-Sem function is called within the main program, so in that main program only we generally used this Ca-Sem. So Ca-Sem is a user defined function used to calculate the sum of the three numbers by passing three arguments or three parameters called A, B, C. So this is the main program or main code, and after that we will simply display the sum of the code or sum of the result. So after that we simply close the main program. So this is called as this is the main program. After that, after writing or completing main program, we may use Ca-Sem function define. So we know that what is the three components. What are the three components used in while using functions? So first one is called as function definition. Second one is called as function parts are used while using functions. First one is function definition. Function definition means you have to define each and every function. You have to define each and every user defined function in a program before using or calling it. That is the first part. It is called as function definition. Second part is called as function calling a function from a main program. Second part is called as calling a function or calling a function. Means generally there again two parts, called functions and calling a function. So after defining a function in a C program, you have to call this function. You have to call this function from within the main. So it is called as a calling a function. Calling a function means we simply use the function name. We simply call the function by using its name and with any parameters or arguments if any have, and that is called as calling a function. Generally there are two parts again, called function and calling a function. The third part is the declaration of a function. The third part of function is called as declaring a function. So declaring a function means you have to declare the body of the function. So generally the declaration of a function is done after the main program. So these are the three important parts while using functions. So here we may declare the function Ca-Sem with three parameters or values called x, y, z. So here after main program you have to use you have to declare the program called Ca-Sem with three parameters x, y, z. So basically these three x, y, z are integer values. After that you have to define some local variables, some x plus y plus z, and return statement. Here you use some statement called return. What is the return statement? Return statement is also one of the part or one of the component of a function. So what is the return statement? Generally return statements are used to return some values. What is the return statement? Return statements are generally used to return some values to the main program, or generally used to return some values to the called function. So you have to send some values, or you have to send some returns, some values or some outputs to the main program. So this is the structure of a function, structure and uses of a functions in C language. So what are the three main components of a C functions in defining and using functions in a C language? First one is definition, defining a function. First one is called as defining a function. Second one is called as calling a function, and third one is called as declaration or declaring a function. So these are the three parts or components of a functions, using functions in a C language. So how to use or how to call a function? So we start with another PPT. So what is the definition of so what is a function? What is the definition of a function? A function is a set of rules or a group of rules, a set of statements or a group of statements which are repeatedly executed for any number of times from the main program of a C language. So there are three parts in functions. First one is the declaration definition of a function. So how to define a function? So this is the syntax of using or defining a function in a C language. So the general form of a function definition in C language programming language is return type space function name within brackets parameter list brackets within brackets body of the function. So return type means, as we know that. So how to define a function? What is the definition of a function, or how to define a function means the general form of a function definition in C language is return type space function name within brackets parameter list and brackets body of the function. So return type, here there are various terms are used: return type, function name, parameters, function body, like that. So return type means every function, generally every function may or may not return some value to the main function. Some functions may return some values and some functions may not return some values, like that. If a void is another type of return type function, means whenever you use void, means it generally doesn't return any value. Function name is name of the function. Parameters means the values or variables passed to a function. They are called as parameters or argument values separated by commas. Function body So here this is a simple example program using functions. So follow this program. This is a simple example function program used to find out called max to find out the maximum of a given number. So here we may write a function called max with two numbers or parameters or arguments passed: int max, int num1 comma int num2, int result semicolon. If num1 is greater than num2, then result is equals to num1, else result is equals to num2, return result. So this is a simple program. Generally it returns an integer value. Generally this function max returns integer or integral value to the main function. So here num1 and num2, here num1 and num2 are two parameters or arguments passed, both are integer values, and this function max returns a return type of this max function is int or integer, and so return statement is used. Here you see that return at the end of the function code you may use a return statement. What is a return statement? A return statement is generally used to, what is the use of return statement? Return statements are generally used to return some value to the main program. So function declaration. So how to declare a function? So as we know that generally in functions there are three parts. First one is function declaration, syntax of function declaration: return type space function name, return type space function name bracket within brackets parameter list or argument list separated by commas. So example is int space max within brackets int num1 comma int num2. So another example is int max within brackets int comma int, calling a function. So how to call a function? How to call a function? So calling a function means, generally to call a function, we generally all functions are called within a main program, only. So the syntax is here. First of all, in this example, first of all we may define functions, function declaration first part. After that, main part. In the main part, we are using, see here, calling a function to get the maximum value. Return is equals to maximum of a comma b. So return is equals to maximum of a comma b. That is the calling of a function. After that, after closing the main, we may use some definition of a function, or function declaration. It is called as. So after that, we may here declare write the code or program for function. So int max, int num1 comma int num2. Here int result, if num1 is greater than num2, then result is equals to num1, else result is equals to num2, and return statement. So function arguments. So what are function arguments? Function arguments or function parameters are generally the values which are passed, or the values which are passed through a function. The values which are so generally calling a function is generally of two types: call by value and call by reference. Call by value and call by reference. Call by value means we simply call a function by its by passing some values or by passing some variables, etc. Call by reference means simply call the functions by using some address values, and parameter address values. So this is today's class. We may continue in the next class.